Let's continue by taking a look at absolute value in the equation set in the form of the absolute value of x equals the absolute value of y. Given two absolute value equations, when are the absolute value equations equal? This is an important thing to consider. Okay? And this allows us for a setup with how we can solve when there's absolute values on either side of our equation. So if I take the absolute value of 2 and the absolute value of 2, those give me the same value. When I take the absolute value of -2 and -2, those are the same. That gives me the same absolute value. If I take the absolute value of -2 and the absolute value of 2, that gives me the same absolute value even though the expressions inside the bars are opposites, and if I switch the order of those, again, they're opposites. So what this does is it sets up this idea that when we have the absolute value set to another absolute value, we can write two equations where we have x equals y, and when we have x equals negative y, the opposite of y. Or we could write the opposite of x, or we could do negative x equals y. We could use either of these setups in order to solve for the absolute value. So let's take a look at a couple examples. So here we have two absolute values set equal to each other. Well, we can start by saying, well, if I take the absolute value of 3x plus 2, it has to equal the absolute value of 5x minus 8, okay, of that expression. When we take those absolute values, those expressions must be the same. So we'll solve that equation. But we'll solve a second equation. We'll take the 3x plus 2 equal to 5x minus 8, but we're going to take the opposite of one side of the equation. We could either do the 3x plus 2, or we could do the negative 5x minus 8. It doesn't matter. Just pick one side and change it to its opposite. So let's start with our first equation. Let's group our variables and move our constants. So we get x equals 5 for the first side. And let's go ahead and check that answer while we're here. We could say 3 times 5 plus 2 and take the absolute value and see if it's equal to 5 times 5 minus 8 and its absolute value. And we can see here that we ended up with two values inside of our absolute value that are the same. The absolute value of 17 equals the absolute value of 17 because they're both 17. We know that those are going to work. Well, let's see what happens when we take the opposite, like we did over here, just for one side. We say 3x minus 2, that stays the same, 3x plus 2, sorry. We distribute our negative. We have negative 5x plus 8. Let's go ahead and move our variables and our constants. We have 6/8, which reduces to 3/4. So let's go ahead and check that by plugging it back in. 3 times 3/4 plus 2 with the absolute value and see if it equals 5 times 3/4 minus 8 and its absolute value. So we get 9/4 plus 2, which is 17/4 when we add those together. And on the right-hand side, we get 15/4 minus 8, which equals negative 17/4, the absolute value. And notice how you have the absolute value of two opposite expressions, like this example up here. And we know that 17/4 absolute value is going to be the same as negative 17/4 absolute value. They're both 17/4. So we know that works as well. Therefore, our solution is 5 and 3/4. Let's take a look at another one. So here what we're going to do is we're going to take our absolute values. We're going to drop the bars for one of the equations. And then we're going to drop the bars for the other equation, but we're just going to use the opposite of that equation. Okay, so we have, let's go ahead and add x and add 3. So we get 2x equals 8, x equals 4. We can check that answer. 4 minus 3, its absolute value, is that the same as 5 minus 4 and its absolute value? 4 minus 3 is 1. 5 minus 4 is 1. The absolute value of 1 equals the absolute value of 1. So we know that 4 is a solution. X minus 3 equals negative 5 plus x. We subtract x. Well, now we have a case where our variables cancel out. Sometimes this happens. Negative 3 equals negative 5. Well, because negative 3 does not equal negative 5, and it's a false statement, we don't have any other solutions for this equation of absolute values, so x only equals 4, and we don't have a second solution.